Thunder rattled across the sweeping plains, echoing like the drums of an oncoming storm. Harriet Cassidy lay in a weather-beaten wagon, her newborn daughter wrapped against her heart. The scent of gunpowder and blood clung to the night, a grim omen that nothing in the West was ever guaranteed, least of all mercy. Beneath the jagged glow of lightning, she saw the silhouettes of men galloping away, dust swirling in their wake. They had left her behind for birthing a girl instead of the prized son they expected. With the cry of a distant coyote, Harriet realized she was alone, until the quiet footfalls of a Cheyenne warrior changed her fate forever. Harriet Cassidy had grown up in a small settlement near the bustling overland trail, not far from the famed Fort Laramie, in what was then the Dakota Territory. All her life, Harriet heard tales of brave pioneers crossing the continent to carve out a piece of the unknown wilderness for themselves. To her young mind, those stories sounded romantic and adventurous. She thought the West was a place for new beginnings, for people determined to break free from the confines of stodgy Eastern society. With a rucksack of untested faith and a heart full of eager hope, she believed the frontier had the power to transform even the bleakest fate into a shining promise. James Cassidy was the man who had made her laugh, made her dream once upon a time, a traveling cattle wrangler, big and broad, with a hearty laugh that turned heads in the local saloon. James seemed larger than life to Harriet's impressionable mind. When he asked for her hand, Harriet's parents, keen to see their daughter wed to someone sturdy enough to protect her in such dangerous lands, didn't hesitate. Harriet left her childhood home, brimming with the idea that destiny had placed her on a wondrous path, but life in their wagon, as part of a small group of travelers heading deeper into the frontier, was hardly a fairy tale. Harriet discovered quickly that James craved power and recognition. He preferred gambling over the campfire with the other men to making sure Harriet was settled. She was far too often left alone, learning to prepare meager meals under the open sky, patching the wagon's worn canvas, or calming the horses after a sudden thunderclap. Disappointments piled up as Harriet realized James's affections were more fleeting than she had hoped. Still, she remained loyal and tried to adapt to the harsh routine of daily survival. Night after night, Harriet sang lullabies to the unborn child she suspected she carried, believing that once a child arrived, James would settle. She prayed to God that James would see the glimmer of fatherhood as a chance to become the loving, dependable man she had once imagined him to be. She did not understand then that sometimes men cling to the illusions they want, rather than the blessings they have. By the time Harriet's belly grew round and unmistakable, their party had long since pitched tents in an open meadow near the Sweetwater River. A scorching sun glowered down on them, and the tall grass swayed lazily, insects buzzing around sweaty brows. That evening, Harriet's labor pangs started during a backdrop of pinkish gold skies and the faint aroma of dusty sage. James was beside her for the first hour, though he paced anxiously, complaining about the child taking too long to arrive. As Harriet gritted her teeth against searing waves of pain, she saw a mixture of frustration and dread on his face. He had muttered during the pregnancy that he wanted a son, an heir to the Cassidy name, a boy to help claim land, build a ranch, and eventually open a thriving cattle business. James's obsession with having a male child overshadowed Harriet's own dreams of simply holding a healthy baby in her arms. After midnight, Harriet delivered a tiny wailing girl. The midwife, a traveling widow named Constance, marveled at the infant's health, praising Harriet for her strength, exhausted but filled with maternal warmth. Harriet smiled through her tears as she pressed the newborn to her chest. She named her Lily, after the white flowers that thrived along the banks of the Sweetwater. For a moment, Harriet felt like she was cradling a small miracle in her arms. The baby's cries subsided as Harriet cooed softly, tears of relief streaking her sweaty brow. James poked his head into the wagon. The flush of whiskey on his cheeks revealed he had spent much of Harriet's labor at the makeshift saloon tent. When he realized it was a girl, his expression went dark. Without uttering a word of congratulation or comfort, he stomped away. Constance's dismayed gaze followed him. Harriet shut her eyes, feeling that her dreams of harmony and acceptance might be stillborn alongside the night's agony. In the days that followed, Harriet tried to soothe Lily's cries and keep her warm despite James's simmering resentment. He refused to hold the baby. Harriet would catch him staring with a bitter expression, as though Lily were an unworthy burden. He barely spoke to Harriet, preferring to join the men in their loud, brash conversations about staking claims further west. Harriet feared to confront him, suspecting that he would lash out, or worse, abandon her. Then came the night that changed everything. Thick storm clouds gathered in the dusk sky, swirling into a menacing black mass. The wind picked up rattling tents and forcing travelers to secure their wagons with extra rope. Harriet sat cradling Lily, her stomach tight with foreboding. James and a handful of men lurched into the wagon, reeking of sweat whiskey and mania. They spoke in hushed tones about continuing westward at first light, about forging ahead into the mountains, away from any prying eyes. They intended to carve out a piece of land for themselves, no matter the cost. James stood before Harriet, an oil lantern casting grim shadows over his face. "You slowed us down already, with the childbirth," he spat. "You gave me a girl, Harriet, a worthless mouth to feed. I have no patience left." Harriet's heart pounded in her chest as thunder shook the plains outside. Lily started to fuss in her arms, frightened by the tension. She pressed her lips to the baby's forehead. James looked at Lily in disgust. "You can't ride with us tomorrow," he declared, his eyes flinty. "You'd only hold us back." "What are you saying?" Harriet's voice trembled. "I'm saying," James sneered, "that we're done." He turned to the men. Two of them stepped forward and grabbed Harriet by the arms. She cried out in terror. Lily's fragile body was jostled. She struggled to protect her daughter, but the men wrenched Harriet to the wagon door. Outside, the wind shrieked and stung her face with sand. Lightning cracked across the horizon. James climbed onto his horse. "You want to stay alive? Prove you can survive in this savage land. I'm not dragging any useless burdens around." He spat at the ground near Harriet's feet. "If you die well, that's not my concern." Harriet pleaded, tears mixing with rain as it began to pelt down. But James turned his back and galloped into the darkness, the others trailing behind him like phantoms in a nightmare. Harriet stood there trembling, one arm bleeding from where a rough hand had ripped her dress. Lily wailed in the sudden gust of thunderous wind. Harriet had never felt so utterly forsaken. She curled into the meager shelter of the wagon's steps, the air rumbling above. The storm battered her, and mud pooled around her feet. With no horse, no provisions, Harriet thought she would surely perish by morning. Lily's frantic cries were a reminder that she had to keep going somehow. The storm had long since passed, but the world it left behind felt hollow and raw. Harriet huddled in the muddy dark, her back against the broken wagon's wooden step. Rain still dripped from the canvas above, steady and cold, soaking her hair and the frayed edges of her dress. She wrapped her arms tighter around Lily, shielding the infant as best she could from the sharp night air. The baby whimpered, her tiny fists curled against Harriet's chest. The sound, fragile, nearly lost to the wind that hissed across the plains like a warning. Each time Harriet closed her eyes, she saw James's face, twisted in disgust. "You gave me a girl." His voice still echoed inside her, colder than the rain. She had been left to die. Her body ached, her shoulder bruised from where they'd grabbed her, her back stiff, her arms trembling from hours of holding her child without rest. Every breath tasted of earth and fear. The lantern had gone out hours ago, and with no fire, only darkness remained. The baby cried again, more insistent this time, and Harriet tried to hush her with soft, shaky humming. "I'm here," she whispered. "Mama's here." But how long could she say that and believe it? A distant crack split the night. Not thunder. Something else. Something deliberate. Harriet's heart seized. She tightened her grip on Lily, peering into the distance. Shapes moved in the tall grass. Fear surged like a wave. Was it James? Had he sent someone back to finish what he started? Then she saw it. A silhouette upright and walking. Not a horse, not a group. Just one man. The figure moved slowly, deliberately. Not like someone stalking prey, but like someone searching for something precious. Harriet's breath caught in her throat. She pressed Lily closer. Panic rising. Should she run? But where? The figure stepped into the faint moonlight, and Harriet froze. He was tall, wrapped in furs and worn leathers that clung to him like second skin. His dark hair was braided, falling past his shoulders, and beads shimmered faintly in the low light. He carried no gun, only a bow slung across his back and a knife sheathed at his hip. His eyes, though shadowed, were calm, watchful, not threatening. He stopped several feet away, raised both hands, slowly, palms open. Harriet blinked through her fear. A gesture of peace. Still, she whispered, "Don't come closer." The man knelt. She could barely see his face, but his movements were deliberate and without aggression. Slowly, he reached into a pouch and pulled out a soft cloth, folded clean dry. He placed it on the ground in front of him. Then he did the same with a small leather water flask. Harriet's throat tightened. Her lips were cracked from thirst, her arms shaking from fatigue. But she didn't move. The man spoke low, rhythmic syllables in a language she didn't know. Cheyenne, maybe. It didn't matter. The tone was not demanding. It was soothing. He looked at Lily, then back at Harriet, his brow softening. Harriet hesitated, then inched forward. Her knees sank into the mud as she reached for the cloth and flask. She sniffed the water. It was clean. She took a sip, then trickled a few drops onto Lily's lips. The baby quieted eyes, fluttering in drowsy confusion. Tears filled Harriet's eyes. "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer, perhaps didn't understand. Instead, he reached into a satchel and took out a soft, buffalo hide wrap. He held it out gently, wordless. With trembling hands, Harriet allowed him to drape it over Lily, tucking it gently under the baby's chin. The warmth was immediate. She gasped softly as the heat seeped into her skin. Then, seeing her fatigue, seeing her on the edge of collapse, the man stood, circled around her with care, and with no sudden movement slid one arm behind her shoulders, the other beneath her knees. "No," she murmured weakly. But her body surrendered. The last reserves of strength were gone. Lily rested between them, tiny and safe, and Harriet, for the first time in hours, leaned into another human being's warmth. Not James's contempt, not the cold of the plains, but the quiet steadiness of someone who asked for nothing. As he lifted her, Harriet slumped against his chest, breath ragged. The scent of leather smoke and something herbal filled her nose. She could feel his heart beat, slow, steady. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice nearly lost to the night. "Thank you." The stranger walked through the wet grass, carrying them both. As Harriet slipped into unconsciousness, cradled like a broken bird in his arms, her final thought before the dark took her was not of fear, but of wonder. Maybe not all men in this land were meant to destroy. Maybe some came to save. Harriet drifted in and out of awareness over the next few days. When she finally woke with clear senses, she found herself beneath a small canvas canopy, separate from the battered wagon. Instead of the biting wind, she felt a faint warmth from a low fire. The Cheyenne man was there, carefully tending to the flames. He noticed Harriet stirring and offered a small wooden bowl of warm broth. Lily lay asleep on a folded buffalo robe beside Harriet, her breathing soft and steady, Harriet's heart flooded with gratitude. She pressed the bowl to her lips, wincing at the pain in her shoulder. Bruises and cuts covered her arms. Her side ached fiercely, likely a cracked rib. As Harriet finished the broth, the man sat quietly, allowing her time to gather herself. Finally she found her voice. "My name is Harriet," she said weakly. She pointed to herself, then to Lily. "This is Lily. Thank you. You saved our lives." The man nodded. He placed a hand over his chest. "Nahkohe," he said, then repeated it. Harriet fumbled over the syllables. It sounded like Nahkohe. He seemed amused by her hesitant attempt, and she tried again. "Nahkohe." The man's eyes gleamed, and he nodded. They spent a clumsy moment exchanging simple words. Harriet realized his name, translated in some manner to Painted Horse in English. He was Cheyenne, a people who had long roamed the Great Plains, often pushing westward now to avoid conflict with encroaching settlers. Harriet noticed how well he carried himself, no trace of arrogance, only a collected dignity that reminded her of water running smoothly over stones. He offered her some herbs, indicating she should place them on her wounds. Harriet complied, wincing at the stinging sensation, but appreciating the care. Over the next few hours, Harriet used gestures and the few words she gleaned from Painted Horse to understand their predicament. They were still near the Sweetwater River, though more to the north, where the terrain climbed, and rocky outcroppings offered some natural shelter. It seemed Painted Horse was traveling alone. She did not know his purpose yet, but she did know he had risked his safety to rescue her in the middle of a storm. At night, Harriet struggled to sleep. Nightmares haunted her, flashbacks of James's cold stare, the men's rough hands, the swirling storm. In those waking moments, Painted Horse would often rise from his seat near the fire, gently place a hand on Harriet's shoulder, and speak soft words of reassurance in Cheyenne. She did not comprehend their meaning, but the tone alone eased her fears. As Harriet and Lily slowly regained their strength, Painted Horse prepared to move. He rigged a travois, a simple sled made from branches and buffalo hide, so Harriet could rest while they traveled. He taught Harriet to strap Lily close to her chest to keep her safe and maintain Harriet's mobility. Though Harriet was still weak, Painted Horse assured her that remaining in one place for too long invited danger, be it from roving outlaws or suspicious settlers who might shoot first if they saw a lone Cheyenne. Harriet remembered hearing about such violence in her old settlement days. She felt a pang of guilt and sorrow, thinking about how men like James would have no qualms about shooting Painted Horse simply for being a savage, as they crudely put it. Yet Painted Horse showed more compassion in a single night than James had throughout her pregnancy. She wondered how fear and ignorance fueled so much hatred. In quiet moments, Harriet prayed for a chance to repay Painted Horse's kindness in some way, Soon Harriet and her infant daughter were on the move. Painted Horse led them across rolling plains, dotted with stunted trees and shimmering streams. The travois's gentle sway lulled Lily to sleep. Harriet observed the sky turn from dawn's pastel pink to midday's brilliant blue. Every mile they covered felt both daunting and exhilarating. Harriet had never ventured into such unknown territory, in such unusual company. One morning, as Painted Horse guided Harriet along the edge of a steep ravine, Lily began to fuss with hunger. Harriet paused, leaning against a boulder to nurse the baby. Painted Horse wandered a short distance away, scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. Harriet gazed upon the grasslands, thinking about her life's abrupt changes. She had lost her husband, though truthfully, was he ever truly hers? She had lost the wagon and the sense of belonging to a group meager, though that belonging had been. But Harriet realized something else with Painted Horse. She felt safer than she ever had with James. As she lulled Lily back to sleep, Harriet noticed Painted Horse had returned. He looked uneasy, pointing to the west. Harriet squinted. Far in the distance, a handful of riders on horseback kicked up dust, their silhouettes unmistakably armed. Harriet's pulse quickened. Painted Horse motioned for Harriet to follow him down a winding path along the ravine's edge. Their steps were as quiet as possible, though Harriet's heart thumped loudly in her ears. She feared the men might be outlaws or James and his companions. Though the distance was too great to tell, Harriet thought she saw a tall figure leading the riders, reminding her of James's broad shoulders. Panic seized her. Could James have returned to finish what he started? Painted Horse gestured for Harriet to lie low. They waited behind a cluster of rocks until the riders were merely dark figures on the horizon. Harriet barely breathed, hoping Lily wouldn't cry out. Finally, Painted Horse risked a peek and saw they were gone. He nodded for Harriet to resume their journey. As Harriet hoisted Lily's makeshift sling, she whispered a prayer of gratitude that they had avoided detection for now. More weeks passed, and Harriet gradually adapted to a life shaped by Painted Horse's rhythms. They rose with the sun, foraged for roots, berries and small game to sustain them, and travelled in short bursts, so Harriet could rest her healing body. Harriet discovered Painted Horse knew a smattering of English enough to offer her guidance. Between her efforts to learn a few Cheyenne words and his to speak English, they formed a rudimentary but warm understanding of each other. In the evenings, Painted Horse sometimes shared stories through gestures and halting words. Harriet learned he had once belonged to a larger band of Cheyenne, but set out alone to fulfill a personal vow after a tragedy. Though Harriet did not fully understand the details, she recognized that Painted Horse carried a deep sorrow. She would catch him gazing at Lily with an unreadable expression, as though seeing a memory he could not quite touch. Harriet reciprocated, telling Painted Horse about her old life, about how James had stolen her innocence and trust. He listened intently, anger flickering in his normally serene eyes. It moved Harriet that Painted Horse, who owed her nothing, reacted with such empathy. She admitted that she was terrified. James would track her down. Painted Horse responded with a firm but reassuring gesture. As long as they were together, he would protect her. One windy afternoon, Painted Horse guided Harriet along a rocky slope. The air smelled of pine and wild sage. Suddenly Painted Horse tensed. He held out an arm, motioning for Harriet to stop. Faint hoofbeats echoed through the valley. Harriet's breath caught in her throat as she spied a single rider leaning forward in his saddle, scanning the cliffs. The man turned slightly, and Harriet's blood ran cold. It was James. Her husband looked worn, dusty, and perhaps even slightly desperate. He was alone, which was unusual. Harriet's mind reeled with questions. Did he lose the others, or was he scouting for them? Fear gnawed at her belly. Painted Horse. And Harriet crouched behind large boulders, hearts pounding in unison. Lily sensed the tension and remained silent, as though fate chose that moment to show mercy. James paused near a scraggly pine tree, looking out over the valley. He seemed frustrated, maybe even regretful, though Harriet had trouble imagining James genuinely regretting anything. Then, as if giving up, he spurred his horse onward. The sound of hooves faded into the distance. Harriet collapsed against the rock in relief. That night, Harriet slept little. She worried about James's presence, about the potential threat to Painted Horse if James discovered them. Painted Horse, sensing her fear, tried to reassure her. Harriet wondered if Painted Horse had a destination in mind, or if they would keep wandering indefinitely always. One step ahead of the ghosts from Harriet's past. Their journey led them to a pocket of lush meadow at the base of the mountains, where Painted Horse decided to make a temporary camp. Harriet was grateful for the rest. Her strength had returned enough to help gather firewood and set up a small lean-to. Painted Horse foraged wild onions and tubers, while Harriet found a creek to wash clothes and rinse Lily's blanket. The baby giggled at the sound of the running water. In the flickering warmth of a nighttime fire, Harriet felt a profound sense of solace. She realized that Painted Horse was no longer just a savior or guide. He had become her friend. Her confidence in him extended beyond survival. When Painted Horse held Lily and rocked her gently, Harriet saw a tenderness that James had never shown. A sense of belonging welled up in Harriet's heart. She did not know if this was a fleeting chapter of her life, or if it could turn into something lasting and genuine. But for the first time, Harriet glimpsed a future where Lily might grow without fear, cherished by people who truly cared. One night, Painted Horse motioned to Harriet's arms, examining the scarring bruises. He pressed a soothing salve of herbs onto her scrapes. Harriet thanked him quietly. Then he gazed at Lily, asleep nearby. "Daughter," he said in a soft, careful English, tapping his chest and then Harriet's. "Ours." Harriet's eyes widened at the implication. She wasn't sure if Painted Horse was claiming Lily as part of his family, or whether he was suggesting Harriet was under his protection in a paternal way. Harriet nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. "She's all I have," Harriet whispered, Painted Horse solemnly. Set a hand lightly on Harriet's. She felt the silent resonance of acceptance a vow. Though Harriet could not decipher every nuance of Painted Horse's meaning, she understood that Lily would never again be rejected simply for being a girl. Despite the relative peace in the meadow, Painted Horse began to worry about the changing season. Nights were growing colder, and the risk of frost was real. Harriet, noticing Painted Horse's concern, offered to help look for a more sheltered spot at lower elevation. Painted Horse's plan was to head toward a Cheyenne-friendly area near the Powder River, a place he knew well. Harriet agreed. She knew little about Cheyenne lands, but Painted Horse's calm confidence gave her hope. 3 days into their journey northeast, they saw the sign, a column of smoke, rising against the horizon. Painted Horse's eyes narrowed. Smoke could mean many things. Some Cheyenne bands used signal fires, but it could just as easily be settlers or outlaws. Painted Horse decided they should circumvent the area by traveling south around a low ridge. As they trudged across uneven ground, Harriet felt a prickle on the back of her neck. She glanced around, seeing nothing but scattered boulders and the sharp silhouettes of leafless shrubs. Lily, strapped to Harriet's chest, snoozed fitfully. Painted Horse raised a hand, motioning Harriet to freeze. Suddenly a gunshot cracked through the silent air. Harriet gasped and stumbled backward. Painted Horse darted behind a boulder, pulling Harriet along. She shielded Lily with her body, heart pounding so loudly it roared in her ears. More gunshots whizzed by, ricocheting off rocks. Harriet's breath stuck in her throat, fear paralyzing her limbs. A gravelly voice shouted from somewhere in the distance. "Come out, you savage! Show yourself." Harriet's heart sank. She recognized that voice. It was Jed Barrow, one of James's cronies. She clutched Lily tighter. Painted Horse peered around the boulder, silently gauging their attackers' positions. Harriet closed her eyes, praying they could slip away. But the men were advancing, half-circling the area. Painted Horse pointed to a depression in the ground. Behind them, a ravine that might allow them to escape unseen. Harriet nodded, swallowing her terror. Painted Horse signaled for Harriet to follow quietly. They crawled on hands and knees, the gritty dirt biting into Harriet's palms. Each time a bullet pinged against the rocks, Harriet's stomach lurched. They managed to reach the lip of the ravine, sliding down a slope of loose gravel. Harriet nearly lost her footing, but Painted Horse caught her elbow, steadying her. The men's shouts grew fainter behind them. Painted Horse led Harriet along the ravine floor, cutting through rocky turns. Lily began to cry, the echo bouncing off stone walls intensifying Harriet's panic. Painted Horse signaled Harriet to hush Lily if she could. Harriet rocked her daughter gently, whispering a trembling lullaby. Finally, the sound of the men's curses faded. Painted Horse found a hidden alcove behind a tangled mass of fallen trees. They huddled there, hearts throbbing in unison. Harriet realized that if these men were out searching for Painted Horse, it likely meant James was not far away. She shut her eyes and leaned back, exhaustion overwhelming her. Painted Horse stared into the darkening sky, his expression grim. This land was no longer safe. It took them another week of stealthy travel, moving only at dawn and dusk, to reach the outskirts of a Cheyenne winter camp, nestled along a bend of the Powder River. Harriet felt a wave of relief when Painted Horse explained haltingly that these were his kin, a small band of northern Cheyenne, led by an elder named White Antelope. They would find shelter here. At first, Harriet was terrified of how the Cheyenne people would react to a white woman with an infant among them. She feared suspicion or outright rejection. But Painted Horse's people welcomed Harriet with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Older women quickly took Lily, cooing and doting on her, as though she were any other baby. Harriet felt tears threaten when she realized how naturally these strangers offered warmth, contrasting sharply with how her own people had cast her aside. White Antelope, a wizened leader with silver braids, listened as Painted Horse related Harriet's story. Though Harriet only caught pieces of the conversation, she gleaned that Painted Horse claimed Harriet and Lily as his responsibility, and that James and his men were a threat. White Antelope's expression darkened at mention of the men. He nodded solemnly, then turned to Harriet with a compassionate gaze, gesturing that she and Lily were safe among them. Harriet's relief was immense. For the first time in weeks, she slept in a proper lodge, warmed by a communal fire, and lulled by the rhythmic, soft chanting of Cheyenne songs. Painted Horse visited often, checking on Harriet and Lily's welfare. Harriet was provided with a modest sleeping arrangement on buffalo robes, and Lily was swaddled in beautifully crafted soft leather that a Cheyenne mother gave Harriet as a gift. Grateful Harriet helped with chores, determined not to be a burden. Settling among the Cheyenne, Harriet observed a culture that valued harmony, kinship and respect for the land. There were, of course, war parties, among them young warriors who scouted the plains to defend their territory. She also saw women who commanded the household affairs with admirable dignity. Harriet realized that while the Cheyenne faced relentless pressure from the U.S. government and white settlers, they maintained a proud spirit and a tradition of caring for one another. Harriet's presence was an anomaly, but Painted Horse's word carried respect over time. Harriet used what English words Painted Horse taught the Cheyenne families, and they shared Cheyenne words with her. Lily blossomed in this environment, her small hands reaching for anyone who approached with a smile, an adorable curiosity shining in her bright eyes. One day, as Harriet worked with Painted Horse to tan a deer hide, she mustered the courage to ask a question that had weighed on her mind. "Why did you save me?" she spoke softly, mindful of her limited vocabulary. Painted Horse paused, brow furrowed, as he searched for the best English words. "My wife. She died with child," he said quietly. "In big sickness last winter," he tapped his chest. "I walked alone, pray to spirits, they guide me, found you in storm. You, Lily. Life." His words unraveled Harriet's heart. She felt a deep pang for Painted Horse's loss that explained the ache she sometimes saw in his eyes. A wave of warmth washed over Harriet, an appreciation that Painted Horse had not only saved her, but perhaps found a measure of healing in doing so. In that moment, Harriet made a silent vow she would never betray the trust Painted Horse had placed in her. Word reached the Cheyenne camp that a group of white men was roaming the territory, capturing or killing small hunting parties, and burning lodges. Fear rippled through the community. White Antelope called a council, urging vigilance. Painted Horse joined the scouts, who rode out to assess the threat, while Harriet stayed with the women and children, anxiety clawing at her each time a scouting party departed. Days stretched into tense weeks. The nights grew colder, and Harriet worried about Lily's health, but the Cheyenne women shared warm wraps and taught Harriet how to keep her baby snug. Then one evening, Painted Horse returned with grave news. He had seen James in the distance, leading a band of rough-looking men, scouring the land near the Powder River. Harriet's blood ran cold. James was relentless. She had hoped that after so long he would give up. But Painted Horse sensed James was determined to reclaim Harriet, not out of love, but out of twisted pride or vengeance. Harriet had humiliated him by surviving and thriving without him. The Cheyenne debated whether to fight or retreat further into the wilderness. But White Antelope, as well as Painted Horse, believed that giving ground so easily would only embolden the raiders. Harriet felt torn. She wanted no part in a violent confrontation, but she also couldn't bear to see the Cheyenne suffer because of her. She resolved that she would confront James herself if it meant sparing these people who had given her and Lily a home. After much counsel, Painted Horse and a small group of warriors decided to meet James's men near the Powder River Bend, where the land offered strategic vantage points for an ambush. Harriet, fearing Painted Horse's safety, insisted she come along, though Painted Horse vehemently refused. He wanted Harriet and Lily to stay in the camp, safe among the elderly and children. Harriet stood firm. She believed James sought her specifically if she wasn't there. Painted Horse and his warriors might face James's wrath without any chance of negotiation. Finally, Painted Horse relented on condition that Harriet remain behind the line of warriors. Dusk glowed red and gold across the sky. The evening they set out, Harriet's heart thumped wildly as Painted Horse led her on a sturdy pony. Lily was left in the care of one of the Cheyenne mothers, a difficult but necessary decision to protect the baby from the violence that might unfold. Harriet's stomach twisted with nerves. They reached the Powder River bend, where stunted cottonwoods lined the banks. Cheyenne warriors took positions behind the trees, while Painted Horse and Harriet stood partially in view on a slight rise. The wind rustled the tall grass ominously. As the sun dipped lower, Harriet finally saw the silhouettes of approaching riders. Her pulse pounded in her throat when she recognized the massive frame of James Cassidy. In the lead, James and his men halted a stone's throw away, their horses snorting nervously. Harriet stepped forward, Painted Horse beside her. She tried to keep her voice steady. "James, leave these people be. I am the one you want." James's eyes darkened as he caught sight of Harriet. "You got some nerve standing there with that savage Harriet," he snarled. His gaze flicked to Painted Horse with venomous contempt. Painted Horse said nothing, but Harriet sensed his muscles coiled ready for violence. She raised a trembling hand, pleading, "Let's end this without bloodshed." James spat on the ground. "You think I'd let you live after the disgrace you caused me? Your property, Harriet. You and that girl." He sneered the word. "Girl stole from me by not giving me a son." His lips curled. "Now you consort with Indians. I'll teach you a lesson you'll never forget." Fury and heartbreak mingled in Harriet's chest. She turned to Painted Horse, but before she could utter a word, James fired a shot from his revolver. The bullet whizzed by, splintering bark off a nearby cottonwood. Instantly, the Cheyenne warriors hidden among the trees returned fire with arrows and rifles. The ambush was sprung. Chaos erupted. James's men scattered, some discharging their guns wildly as they retreated. Painted Horse grabbed Harriet's arm, pulling her to the ground. They crawled behind a fallen log, bullets whizzing overhead. Harriet's heart hammered like a war drum. She heard the thunder of hooves as James's men tried to regroup. The Cheyenne, far more experienced with the terrain, maneuvered swiftly and took cover behind brush and rocks. A shriek tore through the air. Harriet peeked over the log to see one of James's men slump from his horse, an arrow lodged in his chest. James roared in anger and spurred his horse forward, charging straight for Harriet's position. Painted Horse leaped up, letting out a fierce cry. He fired an arrow that nicked James's arm, causing him to yelp but not stopping him. James aimed his revolver at Painted Horse's chest. In that split second, Harriet, driven by terror and love, grabbed a rifle from the ground. She had barely fired a gun in her life. Her hands shook violently, but she steadied her aim at James's broad figure. When he cocked his pistol to shoot Painted Horse, Harriet squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, but the bullet struck James's horse in the flank, causing the animal to rear and throw James off balance. He tumbled from the saddle, cursing. Painted Horse seized the opportunity to charge forward, disarming James with a swift kick to his hand. The revolver spun away, landing near Harriet James, and Painted Horse grappled in the dust, each fighting with desperate strength. Harriet, panting, gripped the revolver. She inched closer. Painted Horse pinned. James pressing a forearm into his windpipe. But James, fueled by rage, managed to knock Painted Horse's arm aside. He reached for a knife at his belt. Harriet's eyes widened. She saw Painted Horse was in danger. Without thinking, Harriet aimed James's own revolver and fired. The shot cracked through the din of the skirmish. James jerked, dropping the knife. His eyes widened in shock as he clutched his side. Painted Horse scrambled away, breathing heavily. Silence fell over the immediate area as the rest of James's men scattered or lay wounded. Harriet remained frozen. Her arms trembling from the recoil, James curled on the ground, a look of utter disbelief on his face. Blood spread across his shirt. "You shot me," he rasped, at Harriet, hatred burning in his eyes. She slowly lowered the gun, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You left me to die," she whispered. "You tried to kill all these people. You gave me no choice." James opened his mouth as though to retort, but only a choked gurgle emerged. His gaze turned glassy, and Harriet realized he was losing blood fast. Painted Horse stepped forward, retrieving his knife. Harriet shut her eyes, expecting Painted Horse might finish James off, but Painted Horse only stared, letting James's own fate deliver the final blow moments later. James's breathing stopped. Gunfire still echoed in the distance as the Cheyenne drove off the remaining men. Harriet watched James's body slump, the man who had once been her husband reduced to a twisted figure in the dust. Relief, horror, and sorrow all warred in Harriet's chest. She sank to her knees, dropping the revolver, tears streaming down her face. Eventually, Painted Horse helped Harriet to her feet. The fight had shifted to a scattered chase of James's fleeing men. Some men had surrendered, others were captured, and a few simply vanished into the wild, vowing revenge. But for Harriet, James's death was the final severance of a tie she had once thought unbreakable. The cost was high, lives lost, blood spilled. The sense of relief that swelled in her also carried the weight of guilt. Harriet had pulled the trigger, ending a life she once thought she would share forever. That night back in the Cheyenne camp, Harriet held Lily close, sobbing quietly. Painted Horse sat beside her, solemn and supportive. He understood the conflicting turmoil in Harriet's heart, a savage but necessary act. The heartbreak of betrayal, the heavy yoke of survival. Harriet realized that the West was not a place for easy choices. Every day was an act of will. News spread among the Cheyenne that Harriet had saved Painted Horse's life, that she had stood bravely against the men who threatened them. Some gave Harriet new respect, seeing her not as a helpless outsider, but as a woman shaped by harsh trials, worthy of standing among their ranks. Painted Horse's face softened whenever he looked at Harriet and Lily, as though acknowledging a new path had opened for them. The men who escaped that day did not disappear quietly. They roamed the frontier, telling anyone who would listen about a white woman turned savage, accompanied by a bloodthirsty Cheyenne warrior. They seethed with vengeance, determined to avenge James Cassidy, but the West, unpredictable and merciless, soon turned on them. They were ambushed by Crow warriors in contested territory. Rumor had it that the few who survived ended up in a federal prison for raiding stagecoaches. Thus karma spun its wheel. The men who sought to destroy Harriet and Painted Horse met their own ruin. Harriet learned of these events in fragments through travelers and scouts who passed near the Cheyenne camp. Each story reminded Harriet of how she might easily have shared that fate if Painted Horse had not found her in the storm the days after the battle passed, like soft echoes in a dream. The chill in the wind hinted at winter's slow approach, but for Harriet, the air no longer bit like it used to. There was warmth now in the way the Cheyenne children ran laughing through the village paths in the way. Painted Horse reached for Lily with gentle hands in the way Harriet could finally sleep without flinching at shadows. James was gone. Not just as a man, but as a presence, an anchor to pain she had carried too long. His death had left a scar, yes, but also a space, a quiet, sacred clearing where something new could grow. Harriet stood just outside the Cheyenne winter camp, gazing across the plains. Snow dusted the mountain peaks in the distance, but the valley below was golden with drying grass. She breathed deeply, the cold air filling her lungs with sharp clarity. Behind her, Lily's laughter rang out as she toddled between two older girls who had taken to calling her Little Breeze. Harriet smiled. Her daughter had bloomed here among strangers who became family among traditions unfamiliar but deeply respectful. Painted Horse approached silently, as he often did, carrying a bundle of firewood and a woven wrap of roots and herbs. His eyes were soft, reflecting the sunrise behind her. "You are awake early," he said, in slow, careful English. Harriet nodded. The dreams are quieter now. He nodded in understanding. Storm gone. Heart still strong. They sat together by the cooking fire as smoke curled lazily into the pale sky. Painted Horse took out a carved pipe and lit it, letting the smoke rise as he spoke words in Cheyenne prayers. Harriet knew, gratitude perhaps, or remembrance. Later that day, White Antelope, the tribal elder, called a gathering. The village gathered in a wide circle beneath the cottonwoods. Painted Horse stood at Harriet's side. Lily perched on her hip eyes, wide and curious. White Antelope's voice rose steady and deep, addressing the people in their native tongue. Though Harriet understood only a handful of words, she caught her name. She caught Lily's. She caught Painted Horse and the word for family. Then he turned to her, his gaze full of reverence and kindness. In broken English, he said, "You are strong woman. Not Cheyenne by birth, but Cheyenne by spirit. You protect life. You fight for love. We see you." He placed his hand on Lily's head and looked into Harriet's eyes. "You stay with us. As sister, as mother, as wife, if heart says yes." The village murmured soft approval. Harriet looked up at Painted Horse, whose eyes were steady and searching. He did not pressure her. He didn't even smile, just waited with the quiet strength she had come to trust more than words. Harriet turned to Lily. Her child nestled against her, drowsy and safe. Then she looked at the faces around her, women who had nursed her back to health, men who had guarded her without question, children who called her auntie, a man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return but trust. She swallowed hard and stepped forward, holding Lily close. "I came to this land with nothing but fear," she said, her voice shaking. "I was cast out for birthing a daughter. But here among you, I've found what I never knew I was searching for. Kindness, honor, a place." She turned to Painted Horse. "Yes, my heart says yes." The crowd let out a cheer, soft and rhythmic, like the beating of many hearts in unison. Drums began to sound in the background, slow and steady. Someone started to sing an old song full of longing and hope. Painted Horse stepped forward, taking Harriet's hands in his. In his native language, he spoke words of commitment, words Harriet didn't understand in grammar but understood in meaning. His voice held peace and promise and love. Harriet answered in English, voice firm. "Now I will walk beside you. As long as the sun rises, tears welled in her eyes as she pressed her forehead gently to his. Lily nestled between them like a bridge between past and future. The people began to dance, circling around them, not in spectacle but in celebration of new life, new love and survival. Later that night, as firelight flickered against the walls of their shared lodge, Harriet rocked Lily to sleep. Painted Horse sat nearby, working on beadwork for a small medicine pouch he was crafting for Lily's first winter. Harriet looked at him and felt her heart steady. Not because everything was easy now, but because for the first time she wasn't facing it alone. And in the darkness, as Lily drifted to sleep, with her tiny hand clutching the edge of Harriet's dress, a new dawn was already waiting to rise. Harriet's tale became a quiet legend. Some old settlers whispered about the white woman who turned Indian, but Harriet paid them no mind. She had discovered that survival was not about clinging to the illusions of society. It was about forging real connections with those who cared for you, who would stand by you even in the face of adversity. Harriet raised Lily with love and resilience. The child grew up bilingual, learning both Cheyenne and English, running free over the plains, laughing at the swirl of painted ponies and the hum of old songs. Painted Horse guided her gently, teaching her the art of tracking and the stories passed down through the Cheyenne lineage. Harriet contributed her own knowledge of frontier survival, gleaned from her youth and from the harsh lessons life had thrust upon her. Over time, Harriet noticed her own transformation. She no longer quavered with self-doubt or lived under the shadow of a man's whims. She stood proudly, a partner to Painted Horse, and a mother to Lily, forging a life that was both precarious and beautiful. The bitterness she once harbored toward James softened into a distant regret, overshadowed by the gratitude she felt for her new family. She prayed for peace, for a day when men of all backgrounds could coexist without bullets and hatred. Though that day seemed distant, Harriet had faith that Lily's generation might glimpse the dawn of a more just world. In the end, Harriet found that the West was indeed a place for new beginnings. But it demanded your entire heart and soul, forging you into the crucible of storms and betrayal. She had been left wounded for birthing a girl, yet she survived, thrived, and found love in the most unexpected embrace, a Cheyenne warrior who called her his own, not for what she should be, but for who she was. Thank you for joining us on this gripping journey through the untamed plains of the Wild West. Harriet's strength, combined with Painted Horse's unwavering compassion, proved that love can blossom even in the harshest landscapes, from abandonment and near death to resilience and a new beginning. Their story reminds us that hope thrives where courage and kindness meet. If this dramatic tale of survival and redemption inspired you, please let us know by hitting that like button. Share this video with friends who appreciate powerful stories filled with heart-stopping twists, and remember to subscribe to our channel for more riveting narratives that transport you across history and into unforgettable worlds. Join us next time as we delve into another epic saga of perseverance, faith, and the indomitable human spirit. Until then, ride safe and keep your spirit free on these endless frontiers.